Once we understand that the root of felony disenfranchisement is intentional to take rights away from people, we can't really feel like we've righted the wrongs. My name is Frédérique Desrosiers, and I am the policy manager at Chicago Votes. Voting in prison has gone through different iterations. So it first started as our voting in prison bill that focused mostly on re-enfranchisement, so returning the right to vote to people who are incarcerated. And as we continue to have conversations with lawmakers and kind of saw like some barriers, and so the Race Act kind of combines our voting in prison legislation as well as our civics in prison legislation, where it creates a mechanism for these peer-taught civics courses to be available for anyone who is serving a sentence, and also restores their right to vote. Voting in prison is important. One, I kind of see it as like the extension of the civil rights movement. We know that every marginalized group has had to fight for their right to vote at some point, whether that be Black people, women, Native Americans, all these different groups. And we know that there is a function to taking the right to vote away from a group, right? It strips them of political power. And so the reason why this issue is important to me is because I don't believe that anybody should be left out of like the most fundamental practice of our democracy, which is voting, because that means that we don't value them as citizens, we don't value their voice on the political scene. And it means that we're rendering them voiceless and silencing them. Two people in prison are regular people, just like you and me. They are intimately connected with the system. Many of them are inside of prison because they have had different interactions with state systems. So who better than them knows what is needed to correct and kind of fix some of these things? People in prison should have a vote on the conditions that impact their lives and the systems that they're living in. The state of our prisons in Illinois are terrible. They just closed Stateville due to a whole bunch of different concerns with the water, lead in the pipes, just all these terrible things that are impacting the people who are incarcerated. And legislators and people in power aren't likely to take those issues seriously because they aren't a voting bloc of people that they feel like they have to be responsive to. Growing up, I definitely had like people in my community and family who, had run-ins with the legal system and were incarcerated. And I think that being able to vote is one way that they're able to stay in contact and in connection with their community. We know that incarceration physically separates people from their community, but doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be separated in other ways, like civically. They still are connected to those people that they are, their family members with, they go to church with, all those things, those communities still exist. And so they should be able to still operate, as a part of their community. I have had the privilege of being in relationship and community with people who are currently incarcerated through the Stateville think tank. The think tank was a law and policy think tank where we talked to the guys inside about bills that we're working on, different pieces of legislation, and they kind of like consulted how we decided to move with the legislation, gave their ideas, feedback, and insight from being somebody who's currently incarcerated. What I learned while doing that was, one, that the guys in there are extremely educated, know a lot about policy, and sometimes when we talk to legislators, they'll say, what do they even know about what's going on? They know what's going on, they have unique insights on that should be considered when we're looking at law and policies and how to implement them, especially when it pertains to people in prison. I think that with any stride towards inclusion and letting people into a group that have been historically excluded, you are always going to see people wanting to protect the exclusivity of it. There are a lot of different aspects in the way. The first one is attitudes that people have around people who are incarcerated. We are like living in the backlash of the war on drugs, the war on crime. And so I think that when we are looking at giving people who are incarcerated more rights, we're facing opposition to that for people who don't believe that they deserve it, believe that it should be part of the punishment, want us to focus on, what about the victims' families? I don't think restoring the right to vote to somebody should impact a family of someone that maybe they've harmed. I think we're also just in a political climate right now that is kind of very divisive and not trying to look for the through line, not trying to look for what will give people the most autonomy in their life, and voting for people who are incarcerated gives them a level of autonomy. And I think that there's always going to be a little bit of pushback to that, and I think we're experiencing that right now. I think the impact that passing this legislation will have is, one, hopefully lawmakers will be more responsive to the concerns and issues of people who are incarcerated. Two, I think what this bill does is kind of recognizes people who are incarcerated as full citizens who are, members of their community who should be able to participate. And so I think the same way that we saw voting rights for Black people, for women, kind of ushered in, seeing Black people and women as full members and citizens in their society, hopefully passing this piece of legislation will have a similar impact.